You've probably heard about the Salem Witch Trials, a haunting chapter in history where paranoia took over an entire town. But what really sparked this terrifying hysteria? I'm Edward, and today we're journeying back to colonial America, diving into the unsettling truth behind the infamous Salem Witch Trials, where fear and superstition collided with devastating consequences. Imagine a quiet Puritan town, its inhabitants strictly religious and fearful of anything considered ungodly. Now picture young girls suddenly suffering from strange fits, screaming, convulsing, and claiming they were being attacked by invisible forces. These terrifying events triggered an outbreak of accusations, turning neighbors into suspects and friends into foes overnight. But here's the question historians still wrestle with. What truly caused the bizarre events in Salem? And why did rational people suddenly believe their neighbors were practicing witchcraft? The truth behind this chilling mystery might surprise you, because the Salem Witch Trials weren't simply caused by superstition, but a complex mix of religious fanaticism, community tensions, and possibly even environmental factors. To fully understand what happened, we first need to explore life in Salem during colonial times. This isolated settlement was deeply religious, dominated by Puritan beliefs that saw the devil's influence everywhere. Church teachings warned constantly against temptation and sin, making people hyper-aware of supernatural threats. Now imagine living in constant fear of hidden evil. Anything unexplained, from illness to misfortune, could be blamed on witchcraft, fueling paranoia that simmered beneath Salem's surface. But could mere superstition explain how quickly accusations spiraled out of control? The reality is even more intriguing. Salem wasn't just divided spiritually, it was fractured socially and politically. The town was split into factions, with disputes over land, power, and influence, causing deep resentments. Historians have discovered that many witchcraft accusations conveniently targeted rivals, hinting at darker motivations behind the hysteria. Yet could political grudges alone have ignited such widespread panic? Surprisingly, evidence suggests another shocking factor might have played a role, one you'd never expect: moldy rye grain. That's right, historians have found clues suggesting a hallucinogenic fungus called ergot might have contaminated Salem's grain supply. When consumed, ergot can cause vivid hallucinations, paranoia, and violent convulsions, symptoms eerily similar to the ones reported by Salem's afflicted girls. Imagine an entire community unknowingly poisoned, their minds clouded by powerful hallucinations and fear. But even if ergot poisoning was involved, could it explain everything? After all, hallucinations might have sparked initial fears, but the trials themselves escalated into full-blown panic, resulting in brutal executions. Here's where human psychology takes center stage. Once the accusations began, panic spread rapidly. People desperate to prove their innocence accused others, creating a vicious cycle of fear and suspicion. Imagine being forced to choose between accusing someone else or facing execution yourself. Would you resist or surrender to fear? Historians have uncovered heartbreaking accounts of neighbors betraying neighbors, even family members turning against each other to survive. But why did Salem's authorities allow things to spiral so disastrously out of control? The answer lies in the justice system itself. Salem's courts relied heavily on something known as spectral evidence, the testimony of accusers claiming to see invisible attacks by witches. Today it sounds absurd, but at the time, people genuinely believed witches could send their spirits to torment victims. Imagine a court where dreams, hallucinations, and wild claims counted as legitimate proof. Yet incredibly, not everyone in Salem believed in the accusations. Some residents bravely spoke out against the hysteria, only to become targets themselves. Their courageous defiance reminds us that not everyone surrendered to panic, even amid overwhelming fear. But Salem's leaders were determined to stamp out what they saw as genuine evil. Trials proceeded swiftly, with little chance for the accused to defend themselves. Convicted witches were sentenced to hang, their tragic fates sealed by fear and superstition. Yet one haunting question remains: why did the witch trials suddenly stop almost as quickly as they began? The shocking truth is that Salem's panic eventually turned inward. Accusations began targeting prominent figures, even judges and clergy, making people question their own beliefs. Doubts spread rapidly, and Salem's citizens started to realize how drastically they had allowed fear to control them. But was it simply fear that drove Salem, or something deeper within human nature itself? The Salem Witch Trials weren't merely an isolated event. They offer profound insights into human psychology and the terrifying power of mass hysteria. Imagine an entire community overtaken by collective fear, losing all sense of rational thought. Could something like this happen today? The unsettling reality is that Salem wasn't unique. History is filled with similar examples of mass panic, from medieval witch hunts across Europe to modern-day conspiracy theories. What happened in Salem vividly demonstrates how easily fear can manipulate otherwise reasonable people, transforming communities into dangerous mobs. Yet perhaps the most haunting aspect of Salem's trials is how quickly people accepted horrific acts as justified. Imagine living in a town where your life depended solely on rumors and dreams, where the line between guilt and innocence blurred beyond recognition. But here's where the story becomes even more chilling, because it wasn't only adults who suffered. Some of Salem's youngest citizens were also caught in the hysteria, accused of impossible crimes. Imagine being a child, bewildered and terrified, dragged before a court, accused of witchcraft simply because someone pointed a finger. Incredibly, historians discovered records showing children as young as 4 imprisoned under suspicion of witchcraft. How could supposedly rational adults allow such atrocities? The truth behind this might surprise you, because during periods of hysteria, rationality becomes secondary to survival instincts. People become desperate to protect themselves, even if that means sacrificing others, including the innocent. But eventually, the fever of paranoia broke. Public outrage grew as more respected community members became targets, leading authorities to question their methods. Judges finally banned spectral evidence, recognizing its unreliability. Once people realized they'd condemned innocent neighbors based on illusions and lies, deep shame settled over Salem. Yet Salem's tragic legacy didn't end there. It echoed through history, serving as a painful reminder of humanity's darkest impulses. Years later, descendants of the accused and accusers struggled to reconcile with their ancestors' actions. Salem became synonymous with injustice and intolerance, a warning to future generations about the dangers of unchecked fear. But what can Salem truly teach us today? It reminds us that beneath civilized society lies a thin veneer easily stripped away by fear, panic, and suspicion. Even modern communities, equipped with science and technology, aren't immune from mass hysteria. Salem warns us to remain vigilant, to question accusations carefully, and to seek truth rather than surrender to fear. Historians also highlight another crucial lesson from Salem: the critical importance of evidence-based justice. Imagine how differently Salem might have ended if authorities had questioned spectral evidence from the start. Salem's tragedy underscores why facts and fairness must always outweigh rumor and panic. Yet even centuries later, the Salem Witch Trials remain shrouded in mystery. Historians continue debating exactly what triggered the panic: religious zeal, political tensions, or perhaps a sinister combination of factors. Could we ever fully understand what drove ordinary people to commit such extraordinary acts? The reality is even more intriguing, because perhaps Salem reveals less about the supernatural and more about ourselves. Humans have always feared what they don't understand, whether witches in Salem or conspiracies today. Fear often fills gaps in knowledge, fueling paranoia and suspicion. Salem forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature itself: the ease with which we demonize others, our susceptibility to manipulation, and our vulnerability to collective fear. Ultimately, Salem's true legacy isn't just horror. It's a powerful warning and a mirror reflecting humanity's darkest tendencies. By understanding Salem, we better understand ourselves, recognizing the thin line separating reason from panic, civilization from chaos. So, the next time you hear about Salem's witch trials, remember they weren't simply about witchcraft. They were about fear, hysteria, and the dangerous power of human psychology. Salem reminds us that the real monsters aren't witches lurking in shadows. They're within us, waiting for fear to set them free.